What if the moment you thought was your last wasn't? What if you opened your eyes to find yourself outside your body, surrounded by light, by love, by a sense of home you'd never known before? Or, what if the moment was darker than that, and you came back changed forever? Near-death experiences, they blur the line between life and death, between science and the unknown. And in this episode, we're going to step into that space where awe and skepticism meet and see what we can learn. If you're new here, this is part 4 of a 7-part series where we're exploring death, not as something to fear, but as something to understand. In part 1, we faced the reality of death and why we avoid thinking about it. In part 2, we asked, what is death, really? And explored the biological, philosophical, and spiritual definitions. In part 3, we looked at how the world's major religions make sense of what happens after. And now, in part 4, we're turning to the strange stories of those who have been to the very edge and returned. Are these near-death experiences fleeting illusions of a dying brain? Or are they glimpses into what waits for us beyond? Let's begin. Near-death experiences. Even saying the phrase seems to pull something deep inside us to the surface, that quiet curiosity we keep tucked away until life brushes too close to its edges. Most of us go about our days pretending death is far away, a problem for another time. But then you hear a story. Someone who died for a moment on an operating table in a car accident after a heart attack and came back with something to say. Something strange. Something that doesn't fit neatly into our picture of how the world works. The accounts are strikingly similar, even when told by people from wildly different cultures, beliefs, and eras. A feeling of leaving the body. Tunnel. A light. Sometimes a voice. Sometimes the overwhelming presence of love. So intense it can't be described without tears. Sometimes a panoramic life review. As if every choice, every kindness, every cruelty is replayed at once. Not to judge, but to reveal. For some, it's the most beautiful thing they've ever known. For others, it's terrifying. Shadowy landscapes, presences that feel heavy and cold. And yet, most who return say the experience changes them forever. Their fear of death fades. Their priorities shift. They live differently. It's tempting to dismiss it as just stories. Maybe the mind protecting itself from the unbearable moment of dying. But here's the puzzle. These stories cross oceans, centuries, and religions. An Inuit fisherman in the 1800s describes the same tunnel and light as a modern-day cardiac patient in New York. A Hindu farmer sees his dead relatives welcoming him, just as a Catholic nun reports the same, except hers are saints and angels. So what is happening here? Are these experiences a glimpse beyond the veil, or an illusion spun by a desperate brain? When you start reading near-death accounts in large numbers, the patterns become impossible to ignore. Researchers like Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience in the 1970s, noticed that no matter the age, religion, or background, certain elements appear again and again. First, there's the out-of-body sensation, the sudden awareness of floating above or beside one's own body. People describe watching doctors perform CPR, hearing conversations that later get confirmed by witnesses, even noticing small details in the room that they shouldn't have been able to see. Then there's the tunnel of darkness. Not always frightening, more like a passageway. At the end, a light. Not just bright, but described as impossibly warm, alive, intelligent. Many say it feels like pure love itself, not just a visual glow. Some describe meeting beings of light, interpreted as angels, ancestors, deities, or guides, depending on the person's beliefs. In these moments, communication is not spoken, but somehow understood, as if thoughts and emotions merge into a single current. The life review is perhaps the most unsettling element. People report seeing their entire life play out, not as a cold replay, but as if they are feeling the impact of every action, from the perspective of others. A sharp word that hurt someone years ago is felt in the gut. A small kindness forgotten by the giver is experienced again, but magnified in meaning. And finally, there's the point of return. Almost every account includes a moment when the experiencer is told, or simply knows, that it's not their time. Some resist, begging to stay. Others are sent back suddenly with no explanation. Different cultures add their own details. Rivers to cross, gates to pass through, deities to greet. But the skeleton of the experience is eerily consistent. If these were merely dreams, why would strangers across the world, separated by language, history, and belief, describe the same journey? It's one thing to read a clinical description of an NDE. It's another to hear it in someone's trembling voice. Take the story of Anita Morjani, who in 2006 was dying of end-stage cancer. She fell into a coma, and her family was told she had only hours left. While her body lay motionless, she says she found herself surrounded by a vast, luminous presence, free from pain, suffused with understanding. She claimed she could see her brother flying to her bedside from another country, even though she had no physical awareness. She was given a choice, to stay in that state or return. She chose life, and within days her tumors began to shrink dramatically. Her doctors called it a medical mystery. She calls it a gift from the other side. Or consider the account of Dr. Eben Alexander, a neurosurgeon who fell into a week-long coma from bacterial meningitis. As his neocortex, the part of the brain responsible for conscious thought, shut down. He says he experienced a world of vibrant colors, angelic beings, and a sense of unconditional love. Before this, he was a skeptic. After, he became one of the most public voices defending the reality of NDEs. Not all stories are blissful. Some people report a plunge into darkness, feelings of being trapped, or landscapes of desolation. A few speak of shadowy figures or voices dripping with cruelty. Interestingly, these accounts often come from people who later radically change how they live, as if they'd been shown a warning. And there are quieter stories. A grandmother who feels herself drifting toward her late husband's embrace before waking on an operating table. A child who describes meeting a man made of light and tells details about deceased relatives he never knew existed. They are not proof, but they carry a weight that is hard to dismiss, not because they sound extraordinary, but because they sound deeply human. The meaning of a near-death experience is often shaped by the lens through which it's seen. A devout Christian might see Jesus waiting at the end of the tunnel. A Hindu may encounter Yama, the god of death, or be told by celestial messengers that there's been a mistake in the records. A Buddhist may feel themselves dissolving into pure consciousness, free from all attachments. An atheist might encounter no figures at all, only light, peace, and an overwhelming sense of connection to everything. These differences aren't trivial. They raise a question. Are NDEs a kind of universal experience filtered through personal beliefs, like sunlight passing through stained glass? Or are they proof that our expectations at the moment of death shape the reality we step into? Anthropologists have documented strikingly similar NDEs among indigenous cultures, from Australian Aboriginal communities to the Native American Plains tribes. The symbolic elements vary. Sometimes it's a canoe crossing a river, sometimes a climb up a luminous mountain, but the emotional qualities remain constant. Peace, awe, a sense of homecoming. There's also the curious phenomenon of people encountering figures or scenes they didn't previously know about. A man who had never read religious texts describes a vivid landscape matching an ancient myth from his culture. A child sees a deceased relative she'd never met, later confirmed through old photographs. These stories make it harder to argue that NDEs are only personal projections. Yet skeptics argue that the brain is a meaning-making machine, and in moments of extreme crisis, it will grasp for the most comforting or familiar symbols available. Culture, they say, writes the script, the mind simply plays it out. Still, when the same story echoes from a monastery in Tibet, a fishing village in West Africa, and a hospital in Chicago, it's hard not to wonder whether we're all glimpsing the same vast ocean from different shores. When scientists study near-death experiences, they begin with a simple premise. If these events happen inside the brain, then there must be biological mechanisms behind them. The leading explanations tend to focus on what happens during the moments when the body, and especially the brain, is shutting down. One factor is anoxia, the lack of oxygen. As the brain is starved, vision can narrow into a tunnel, colors may intensify, and hallucinations can emerge. Fighter pilots undergoing extreme G-forces sometimes report tunnel vision and euphoria, not unlike the beginnings of an NDE. Another factor is neurotransmitters. In moments of extreme stress, the brain may release large amounts of chemicals like endorphins or DMT, dimethyltryptamine, a powerful psychedelic naturally present in small amounts in the body. DMT can induce vivid visions, encounters with beings of light, and feelings of oneness, all elements found in NDEs. Then there's the theory of temporal lobe activity. Electrical stimulation of certain brain regions has produced sensations of floating, leaving the body, or reliving memories. It's possible that as the brain loses stability, it misfires in ways that create these experiences. Perhaps the most controversial finding came from studies of brain activity in dying patients. In some cases, a sudden burst of organized brain waves, more intense than in normal waking consciousness, has been observed just before death. This could be the mind's final surge, a last attempt to integrate experience before shutting down. These explanations are compelling. They show that the strange features of NDEs can, at least in theory, be mapped to known brain processes. And yet, they don't fully answer the puzzle, especially the cases where people report accurate details from outside their body or meet relatives they never knew existed. Science can explain the mechanics, but whether it explains the meaning, that's a different question. Even the most skeptical researchers admit there are aspects of near-death experiences that remain stubbornly difficult to explain away. One of the most debated is veridical perception, when someone reports seeing or hearing events during their NDE that are later verified as accurate, despite their body being clinically unconscious. In one case, a woman undergoing cardiac arrest described floating above her body and noticing a specific shoe on a hospital roof. Days later, staff confirmed it was there, exactly as she described, in a place she couldn't have physically seen from her hospital bed. Another puzzling area is the consistency of the life review. If NDEs are purely random neural misfires, why do so many people describe such a coherent, emotionally charged process? And why does it often lead to profound, lasting changes in values and behavior? People return with less interest in material success, more empathy for others, and a sense of purpose that outlasts the shock of the medical crisis. Then there's the timing problem. Studies show that many NDE memories seem to occur during periods when brain activity is minimal or absent. If consciousness depends entirely on the brain, how could such vivid, structured experiences unfold when the brain is effectively offline? This doesn't prove that NDEs are glimpses of an afterlife. It simply means that our current scientific models may not capture everything consciousness can do, especially at the threshold of death. As one researcher put it, we know that consciousness arises in the brain, but we don't know if it ends there. In the space between what science can measure and what humans continue to report, the mystery breathes. And that's where the conversation becomes less about data and more about how we choose to interpret it. For those who approach near-death experiences through a spiritual framework, the question isn't whether these moments are real, but what they reveal about the nature of existence. Many faith traditions see them as confirmation that consciousness survives the body, that what we are is more than flesh and neurons. In Christianity, NDEs are often interpreted as glimpses of heaven or, in rare cases, hell. The light at the end of the tunnel becomes the light of God, the beings of love are angels, and the life review is seen as a moment of divine judgment or mercy. For Hindus, encounters with ancestors or deities align with the belief in reincarnation, suggesting the soul's journey continues beyond the current lifetime. Buddhists may see the dissolving of the self and merging with pure awareness as consistent with teachings on nirvana and liberation from the cycle of rebirth. In many indigenous traditions, NDEs are understood as visits to the spirit world, where the soul may receive guidance or be reminded of its unfinished work in the living world. The return is not a rejection but an instruction. You still have a path to walk. Those who have such experiences often describe them as more real than ordinary life. Colors sharper, feelings purer, truths more direct. They come back with a sense that love, compassion, and connection are not moral obligations, but the very fabric of reality. This perspective sees NDEs not as a brain malfunction, but as a temporary loosening of the tether between body and soul, a chance to look behind the curtain. And for the person who's been there, no scientific counterargument can erase what they felt in that moment. But this raises an uncomfortable possibility. If NDEs are shaped by belief, and beliefs differ, does that mean reality itself changes depending on who dies? Or is there a single underlying truth wearing many masks? The tension between the scientific and spiritual views is not easily resolved. On one side, neuroscience offers elegant material explanations for the sensations and visions people report. On the other, the personal testimony of experiencers carries a conviction that refuses to be reduced to neurons and chemicals. Some argue that the truth may lie somewhere in between. Perhaps the dying brain does produce visions, but those visions might also serve as a bridge to something beyond. The tunnel and the light could be both a neurochemical phenomenon and a genuine threshold experience. In this view, the physical and the metaphysical are not enemies, but two sides of the same door. Philosophers point out that perception is never a direct photograph of reality. Our senses filter, interpret, and translate. If that's true in everyday life, then an NDE might be a heightened form of perception, where the mind is freed from ordinary constraints, yet still colors the experience with symbols it can understand. Then there's the psychological dimension. For people who have NDEs, the meaning often matters more than the mechanism. Whether it was a glimpse or an illusion, the result is often a radical shift. A new urgency to live with kindness, a softened fear of death, a recognition of what truly matters. And maybe that's the strange gift of NDEs. They force us to face the question without giving us the answer. They leave us suspended between awe and doubt, between hope and skepticism. In that space, something in us has to decide not just what we believe about death, but how we choose to live before it comes. Whatever their cause, near-death experiences tend to leave an unmistakable mark on those who've had them. Many describe returning to their lives feeling as if they've been rewired. Petty conflicts lose their weight. The pursuit of status or wealth feels strangely hollow. What matters, they say, are relationships, compassion, and authenticity. This shift isn't always easy. Some experiencers feel alienated from people who haven't shared anything similar. They may struggle to put the experience into words without sounding crazy or overly mystical. A few even sink into depression, not because of trauma, but because the world they saw during the NDE felt more real, more beautiful than the one they came back to. Support groups have sprung up around the world, where people meet to share and validate each other's experiences. Interestingly, many who attend aren't trying to prove anything to skeptics. They're simply seeking connection with others who've looked over the same edge. There are also cases where an NDE propels someone into a completely different life path. Doctors who leave lucrative practices to work in underserved communities. Business executives who trade corporate power for environmental activism. People who, after years of bitterness, reconcile with estranged family members. Even those who never have an NDE themselves can be affected by hearing about them. For some, the stories plant a seed of hope, the idea that death may not be the end, or that life is richer than we realize. For others, they stir unease, forcing them to confront their own mortality in ways they've avoided. Whether you see them as sacred encounters or the theater of a dying brain, NDEs ripple outward, changing not just the experiencer, but the people who listen. And perhaps that's their quiet power. They remind us that life is fleeting, and we don't have to wait for the brink of death to start living differently. In the end, near-death experiences leave us with a paradox. They are intensely personal, yet universally patterned. They can be framed as brain chemistry or as journeys of the soul, and both explanations carry weight. They reveal something, but we can't agree on whether that something is inside us or beyond us. Maybe that's why they continue to capture our attention. We are creatures who crave certainty, but we are also creatures of wonder. NDEs refuse to give us the first while flooding us with the second. They sit in that rare space where belief and disbelief are both reasonable, and where the only honest position might be humility. For the experiencer, the debate often doesn't matter. They know what they felt. They know the love, the peace, the clarity. For the rest of us, hearing these stories can feel like standing at the edge of an ocean at night, unable to see what lies beyond the waves, but aware that the water stretches far past our vision. Whether glimpses or illusions, NDEs press on the same point. Life is fragile, and death is not a distant abstraction but a certainty that shapes us even while we live. We can spend our days in distraction, or we can let this knowledge focus our hearts. Perhaps the truest lesson is not about what happens after death, but about what happens before it. The light, the love, the sense of connection people describe, those are things we can seek here, now, without waiting for the end. And so the mystery remains, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as an invitation. An invitation to live as if we've already glimpsed what matters most, and to carry that vision into every moment we're given. Thank you for sharing this time with me. These conversations aren't easy. They ask us to look closely at things we usually keep at arm's length. But if you've stayed until now, it means something in this journey matters to you. If you found this reflection meaningful, I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the channel. It helps these ideas reach others who might need them, just as you found them today. And if you know someone who's been wrestling with questions about life, death, or what might lie beyond, maybe share this with them. We have more parts to come in this series, each exploring another piece of the mystery. I'd like you to be here for that. Until then, take care of yourself, and live gently with the time you have.